I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
Hey, T-Dog. What is up in his house?
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddities.
My life is a living hell.
There's just so much beauty in the world, you know?
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
The God you believe in is not only not good, that God made a world filled with liberals.
Curse of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
Perhaps I am cringe, but that makes me free.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy that week.
Hell is actually real, and Christianity was right all along. Sorry.
Oh.
The cities are decaying, destroyed by decades of leftist policies. Return to monkey.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This week we are joined by Kaleb of Atlanta, also known as Patriarch Primus on Twitter. He is the self-described only begotten, or that is I'm reading your Twitter bio incorrectly. Orthodox Christian OCA. He proclaims that Jesus Christ is Jesus is God, the only begotten Son, and that he is trying to make black people Orthodox again, and that he is a King James hype man. I've been following him for a while, and I enjoy the kind of the stuff he's bringing. How's it going tonight?
It's going well. Excited for church tomorrow, but it's going all right.
That raises an interesting question. So, how often do you go to church then?
Well, if it were possible, I would have gone to church every single day. But actually, this week I'm on spring break from school, and it is also in the midst of Lent for us Orthodox Christians. And during Lent, the Great Typicon indicates that a pre-sanctified liturgy is celebrated on Wednesdays and Fridays. So I have tomorrow to look forward to, and also on Friday, and then of course next Sunday.
Is that something that you do in the morning before you do anything for the day, or at the end of the day, towards the evening?
It's before, because it's spring break. You know, I have all day free, but the pre-sanctified liturgies are normally celebrated in the morning, and then of course on Sunday the liturgy is in the morning as well.
Okay,
It's the vesperal liturgy. Sorry, it's the vesperal liturgy that is the one that's celebrated in the evening, because Vespers is celebrated at 6 p.m. generally, so the vesperal liturgy would be at 6 p.m. also.
Okay, I was familiar with. I'm a recent convert into liturgical Christianity. I grew up in evangelical land, so a lot of this is relatively new. But I've been attending Anglican services for the past several months. And prior to that, Lutheran services. So I am somewhat more familiar with the nature of the offices. So I was curious if that was tied to what you're doing, if Orthodox Christianity handled the offices differently, or if this is just something specific to the way Orthodox does their Lent liturgy. But that's interesting. Yeah,
we definitely. It's taken centuries and centuries to have everything ironed out exactly. But and honestly, it's still kind of changing, quote unquote, but of course it's Orthodoxy, so things move extremely slowly. But a lot of the traditions you find in liturgical Christianity in the West, can trace back to what was originally established in Orthodoxy, before the schism. So they look similar.
Sure. So I guess just to kind of get started with, how did you, were you always Orthodox from when you were young, or was this something you fell into as an adult?
No, I converted when I was, it started off when I was I was raised kind of nominally Christian. And then about in the ninth grade, 10th grade, I experienced a lot of bad things in my life, that caused me to fall out of Christianity because I blamed God. I was mad at God. I wanted to know why. And so for a time I became an atheist. And I had spent about a year or so trying to disprove God, or trying to find proof that Christianity was false. And what I ended up finding instead was that Christianity was true, based off of a number of either logical arguments or just historical evidence. And since I'm a pretty logical person, or at least I like to think that I am, it was kind of an open and shut situation for me. Well, if Christianity is true, I have to convert to Christianity. So I converted to Christianity, and I decided to keep with that logic and said that I was going to try to find the most true version of Christianity. And from the outset, it was kind of easy for me to discount Protestantism because they had no connection to the apostles. That was my view, them being founded in the 1500s or later. They had no connection to the apostles. So for me, it was kind of left to only a few options, and that was either Roman Catholicism or Orthodoxy. And when you don't know what truth is, it's kind of hard to find out what truth is. So instead, I tried to find out which one was false, because that would probably mean that the other one was true. And what happened for me is that I ended up finding a lot of evidence that Roman Catholicism had changed its doctrine, or had contradicted its doctrine, or lived in contradiction according to how I saw it. So it was the same situation as before. Well, if Roman Catholicism is false, Orthodoxy is probably more likely to be true. So I decided that that would be the first time I go to an Orthodox church. And I still had questions. I wasn't actually completely settled and decided. And when I got to the church and I asked the priest those questions, he answered them for me, and that was it. I was just deciding I was going to become Orthodox. And then in a few weeks, I had became a catechumen, and in about a year and a half, I was baptized.
How hard was it to convert into? I have friends who have converted into Orthodoxy, and they say it takes a lot of time and preparation to do it.
Yeah, well, there is, to an extent, a lot of time and effort put into it. There's obviously the time thing, where most people take about 6 months to a year and a half in order to be baptized. And that's mostly based on when the priest decides that you're ready. But often you won't know, like, am I really ready, or what qualifies me as being ready. If you go through catechism, you'll be educated on what it takes to be Orthodox, what you have to believe, how you have to live, and you will incorporate all of these into your spiritual life before you're baptized. So that way, when you're baptized, you're not like playing catch up and having to discover so much. So I guess you could say that it's hard. For me, it wasn't really hard, because I was prepared to just accept everything that Orthodoxy said, because I had already kind of believed in my heart that it was true. So if Orthodoxy said something, I was going to believe it. And then from then on, it was mostly about finding practices within Orthodoxy and then incorporating that into my spiritual life. And at the time, I had a different issue. Well, not really so different, but an issue that I'm still struggling with right now is that I didn't have a car, and I also was young and under the will of my parents. So I wasn't really able to go to church as often as I would have liked to, and I wasn't able to go to catechism classes. So for the most part, I had to educate myself on the internet. And of course, I would run by the things that I knew with my priest, and he would, correct me if I needed correction, or I would ask him questions and so on. And I was able to kind of get mostly into the Orthodox practice at home on my own, which I think prepared me well for baptism. And then, of course, every day I'm still learning something new. It's never you're never done learning. So, really just being catechized and being prepared to be baptized, that's its own battle. And then, that begins the rest of your life.
What did your family think about you wanting to convert into that? When I started attending Episcopal and Anglican services, my my family thought I was about to go native, and they started asking me all like, why don't you want to be a Christian anymore? Like, what did your parents say?
Well, my family for the most part didn't care. It was just something that I was just doing on my own. But it was mostly my mom who was concerned that I was getting too religious or too fanatical. That I cared about church too much, which in my mind is all just absurd. It's not possible. You can't actually be obsessed with church too much. But, it started affecting, I feel, kind of my relationship, because she thought that I wasn't paying attention to the important things like school, getting a job, those sorts of things. Meanwhile, I thought that church was the only important thing, and then everything else was kind of supplementary. But for the most part, we didn't run into too much conflict with that, but I knew what her opinions were.
So, what were your general objections to Catholicism then?
Well, the main thing for me was the papacy and the filioque, which are obviously the two biggest things that most people know about. With regards to the papacy, there was one particular doctrine that I knew about, which was papal infallibility, wherein the Pope could declare at any time a doctrine that all Christians in the world would have to believe, and it would be infallibly true. And then other doctrines of the papacy, where if the Pope accepts an ecumenical council or the Pope accepts a council, then it's true, that council is true. So with regards to that being an objection of mine, I didn't oppose the idea of it, because if it was true, then it was going to be true. But I wanted to know, was it consistently true? And I knew that there was times in the past when the Pope had accepted a council and then later on rejected that council, or the Pope had accepted a council and then later on, where the Pope had rejected the council and then later on it accepted the council. So that calls into question for me, when was the Pope infallible? How do I know between which of those times the Pope was making the right decision? And how do I know that which one was the wrong decision? And like, what are the qualifying factors for a Pope making a right declaration of doctrine and a wrong declaration of doctrine? Because I need to know that so that I can continue being the Roman Catholic, just in case he makes new statements, and I have to discern based off what we've previously known if that's something that's true or if that's something that's not true. So that was one of them. And the other one was the filioque clause, where in the creed they say that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. And again, I didn't oppose it in concept because I didn't know what truth was. If Roman Catholicism was true, I was just prepared to accept it. But I needed to know if they were consistently believing this, if they believed it all the way from the beginning of Christianity and up until now, or if it was introduced at some time. And it was introduced. And at times they had even repudiated or rejected the filioque clause, such as in 879 when they accepted the Council of Constantinople, which condemned the filioque, and they continued to reject it up until about I believe it was 1014 that they rejected the filioque, and then they started re-adding it back into the creed, and that paved the way for the Great Schism. And for me, it's like, well, if this is true, then wouldn't they have always believed it? Because in Orthodoxy, what you'll find is that all of Orthodoxy's current doctrines are found in the early church, and can trace back to the apostles themselves and the Bible. But that's not something you can see consistently with a lot of doctrines in Roman Catholicism, especially in things like purgatory or the Immaculate Conception of Mary. So the inconsistency of belief in Roman Catholicism is really what led me away from them.
Does Orthodoxy uphold the the Marianism or the two examples you gave?
So no, we don't believe in the Immaculate Conception of Mary, but we do, of course, have a special veneration of Mary. We, if anything, some could say that we have a higher veneration of Mary than Roman Catholics do. We call her the saint greater than the saints. We agree that she's the Queen of Heaven. That she has a special intercessory position with the Lord. She's pretty much always in our icons with Christ. She is very highly regarded. Of course, the one point of distinction that we have with the Roman Catholics is that they believe that she was born without original sin. And for us, it's not like we want to insult Mary, but that really tears apart a lot of our theology on what it means to have original sin and what does it mean for the Lord to even incarnate. Because it is said that he is like us in all ways except for sin. So if you add Mary into that, then now she's in the same position where she was like us in all ways except for sin. But there's other objections to that also.
Yeah, I mean, I still have the Protestant bone in me, so Marianism tends to kind of spark a lot of interesting conversations whenever I get into conversations with Catholics. But what makes the Orthodox tradition different from the mainline Catholic and Protestant traditions then in terms of its theology? Because I've looked at it at a distance, and it seems to have it's very similar in the ecumenical broad strokes, but it definitely feels like there's a lot of things that happen in Orthodox Christianity that aren't necessarily happening in the other two branches.
Well, I think you asked me to compare Orthodoxy with Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. There's a lot of individual,
sure. I mean,
differences between each and one of them.
I don't mean to ask too big of a question here, but I'm just
I think the biggest thing that makes Orthodoxy distinct is that the center of our spirituality is on monasticism, or is on theosis. So with regards to Protestantism, you basically have no monasticism in Protestantism, but in Roman Catholicism, there's not really such a big focus on the monastic life. Not everyone, of course, has to become a monk, but monasticism is the highest calling to God that there is, and that's our belief. And people ought to try their best to live like the monks, even if they couldn't be a monk, or receive spiritual fatherhood from monks as well, so that they can properly live orthodoxy at home and have the prayer of Jesus Christ, the Jesus prayer, in their hearts at all times. Constant prayer is a big thing for us Orthodox, and a thing that we focus on a lot, because obviously prayer is good, but the Holy Apostle Paul does say that we ought to pray unceasingly, and that's something that we've certainly incorporated into our spiritual life. We have this doctrine of theosis, where you become like God. Not, of course, that you become like a new Jesus Christ or something. Of course not. But the Holy Apostle Peter says in his second general epistle that we are made partakers of the divine nature. By the grace of God and by our participation in his will, we can be made partakers of the divine nature as Jesus took on the human nature. In that sense, we can kind of become, I don't want to say something inappropriate, but many gods. Definitely more, when we are united with God. I'm sure a Protestant and a Roman Catholic will say that going to heaven means you're united with God. but we mean that in a more distinct and more personable way, in that we actually are filled with his divinity. And of course, Jesus Christ is higher than we will ever be. He's, we can never attain the heights that he has obtained, but we can definitely surpass all limits of humanity that we are currently experiencing.
I can definitely attest to the fact that there's no monastic tradition within Protestantism. I mean, when I was attending Lutheran services, they actively campaigned against it. I mean, they to the point where they said that it's actively against the, the spirit of the Bible. To what they would essentially say is lock yourself up in a castle and not interact with the world. But obviously, that's not what I think most people who engage with that tradition engage with. The Anglican tradition I've been engaging with is I don't think they currently have any sort of monastic tradition, although I think there has been some attempt to resurrect it in England, but they definitely try to kind of recreate that with the Book of Common Prayer and trying to bring the offices into daily life for the lay people. But it's interesting that Orthodoxy puts that much of an emphasis on it. Do the monks in the Orthodox tradition kind of function the same way they do in the Catholic tradition, where they have their monastery and they do their offices 7 times a day and fully dedicate themselves to celibacy and God?
Yeah, well, the points that you mentioned, that's definitely the practice. We have for monks, they do pray all day. They have their multiple services. Specifically, they have of course, the liturgy, and then the first hour, third hour, sixth hour, ninth hour, then vespers and compline, and the midnight services. And these are constant prayers. And, it's to the point where you fill your life with prayer so much that you don't really need things that, a normal person might need even to survive. So in the liturgy, we pray for deliverance from all affliction, wrath, danger, and necessity. That includes stuff like eating and drinking, and that includes stuff like sleep. Monks tend to actually sleep a little bit less because they are so filled with prayer that they simply don't need it. And monks fast so often that they don't need that much to eat. They have their small meals, and they of course live in accordance with the annual fasting calendar, which stipulates extremely strict fast on a great portion of the year. I think it's often said that Orthodox Christians are vegan for half the year, and while that's not exactly true, it's a very close comparison.
That's a tough way to live. I mean, I'm not unfamiliar with it. My girlfriend is Catholic curious, and she spends a lot of time digging into it. And she talks about how in the medieval period, the 3 stations of life were those who fight, those who pray, and those who labor. So if your job is to pray, you're praying all day and unceasingly, and it is a full-time job, and it's impressive when you hear about it. It's impressive when you actually get to kind of even just kind of see it at a distance. I haven't had the opportunity to visit a monastery or anything, but I just kind of imagine the kind of dedication and patience it takes to live a life like that. I'm sure it's immensely rewarding, but it's also a huge sacrifice and very difficult, I imagine.
Well, I think as you approach it, you kind of realize that, of course, it is difficult, but it's a little bit easier to obtain than you might think, because who is the one granting the grace for people to be able to do that, except for God? If you desire to live more closely to the monastic life, that is, and you go reside at a monastery for a little while, you start putting away your distractions, you put away your phones, you put away, computers, your jobs, and all of that stuff for a little while, 1 week, 2 weeks, and then you realize that it's harder to start than it is to stop. Um, is almost like, waking up in the morning. Uh, I know there have been times where you're in the bed and you're really debating within yourself, should I get up at this time, or should I just take another like 5-10 minutes to go to sleep? And it's the same way with prayer. Um, you're standing there and you're about to pray, and you're really like, am I really gonna pray everything that I pray normally, or am I really gonna go through this whole service? But once you're actually in it, it's way easier. And that's really just demons putting up walls trying to block you in, to keep you from obtaining holiness. And then, of course, once you've gotten into the swing of things, once something is routine, once something is normal for you, it definitely becomes easier.
So what has your experience been as someone who's converted into the faith and who represents it online to some degree? And obviously you have your Twitter account and your Substack. What kind of experience, interest have you seen from other people as someone who advocates for this publicly? Like, because I know one of the things that's kind of happening a lot now is that there's these kind of nascent, millennial and Generation Z movements to try to re-embrace liturgy and the various liturgical Christian movements, and you see it sometimes in confessional Lutheranism, Anglicanism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy. What is your experience on that front?
Well, I think for the most part, most people desiring traditionalism are secretly desiring orthodoxy, but either they don't know about it, or they are setting up false mental blocks within themselves, which are preventing them from converting. And what I mean by that is that everything that they want is in orthodoxy, but they'll say things like, but what about this minor thing that isn't really a big factor in conversion? They'll use sort of arguments like that because I can't really be sure about the exact reason why. I think for the most part it could just be that people are resistant to change. And that's true within Orthodoxy, without Orthodoxy. People don't like things being shaken up all that much. They're not eager to jump into something which they've only heard about for a little while. But they would rather spend lots of time researching something before coming to an answer, if they would even come to an answer. A lot of people don't know about Orthodoxy, of course, and that's especially true in America. But the people who are specifically interested in Orthodoxy, I think it's pretty easy for them to find a lot of resources for getting into the Orthodox faith online, which they can then incorporate into having a priest and then later having a spiritual father. It prepares them for it, almost like putting on floaties when you're getting into the deep end of the pool, But, I try to spread Orthodoxy as much as I can. Some people, they hear about it only for the first time and they're like, well, can you tell me more? And I always love those people. It's always a nice interaction experience.
Do you get people reaching out to you frequently?
Yes, I do. Probably not as frequently as I would like it to happen. But people will DM me and they will say, I'm trying to become Orthodox, or I'm trying to study about Orthodoxy. I have these specific questions about Orthodoxy, and I've probably experienced all of it already. So I actually have a notepad on my phone, which is just full of copy pastes I've written down.
Oh my.
And whenever someone DMs me and they're like, where can I learn more about Orthodoxy? I can just send them, or here's the Catechism of St. Philaret, or the Catechism of St. Peter Mogia, which tells exactly what our belief on this is. Or they're like, what are the differences between Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy? Here's 5 podcasts about it, or what are what are the Orthodox objections to the 5 solas of Lutheranism? And I was like, well, here you go. It's already there. Or they're like, what can I do? What should I do the first time I go to an Orthodox liturgy? And it's like, well, there's a link in my bio actually, which talks exactly about doing that. You should check it out. Where can I find an Orthodox church? Here's a link to a directory. All of this stuff is good for anyone desiring to learn about Orthodoxy. I try to respond to messages as often as I can, but sometimes they get lost. I encourage people to second message me or third message me, because I will respond. I do care. Yeah.
I mean, what are the reasons they say they want to? I mean, is it the same that is it kind of similar to what you and I would go for, given that we're both more interested in what kind of coming out of the evangelical traditions and wanting something more traditional?
Well, I don't really often ask about why they're converting, because for me, it's not really so much about the why that you come, but more like the why that you stay. And of course, everything that I provide is going to supplement that, especially. But in terms of what I've seen people say that they want to become Orthodox because they feel like it's more traditionalist. They're not experiencing all of the spiritual pastorship that they should be in their own traditions. They would like something, liturgical. They would like something closer to the apostles. Or maybe they're becoming Orthodox because everyone else, the whole world is just so disastrous. And it looks like there's so much peace you can experience in Orthodoxy. Or maybe they've seen Orthodox people be so peaceful and so, rejoicing in everything, despite all the affliction that faces the world. And they're like, I want that peace. I want the peace that they're experiencing. Or maybe they notice that Orthodoxy is unchanging. And they're like, I want consistency in my tradition. And maybe they don't know exactly why Orthodoxy is true, or maybe at first they don't even believe Orthodoxy is true. But the point is, once they've been reeled in, it's time to keep them there. It's time to educate them on what the truth is, the things that they have to affirm, and how they have to change their life in order that they might benefit the most. And then, of course, at the end of the road, be saved.
Like I mentioned in the introduction, your bio specifically talks about trying to proselytize into the African American community. Could you explain what the sentiment behind that is about? Is it? I would imagine just at a distance that there's probably not that much Orthodox penetration within the American Black community.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've always been inspired by missionary work, especially in the lives of our saints. We have missionaries for every group. We've had missionaries for Russians, we've had missionaries for Romanians, we've had missionaries for Georgians, we've had missionaries for America, but we haven't had dedicated missionaries for African Americans. And I'm Black. I would like Black people to be saved. If someone's going to do it, perhaps I should. Perhaps I ought to get off my behind and start working on it. And of course, I'm not alone. There's also people like Father Samuel Davis, Father Moses Berry, who are also working on these, especially the Society of the Brotherhood of Saint Moses the Black, which is kind of dedicated to that. But it's a fledgling effort. There's not really too much being done right now, at least in my opinion. I try to offer as much as I can. I try to commission icons of Black saints. I try to, specifically spread the message to Black people. I try to kind of frame it in the African American mindset. Why should we become Orthodox? Well, all of the things that you're mad about in the world, they're solved in Orthodoxy. And that's a very common thing that you will experience with them but it's not so common that they face the answer. So my main motivation is really just trying to save my own people.
You've gone into a couple of black saints on your Substack, right?
On my Medium, yes.
Oh yeah, Medium.
I haven't really posted.
That's just my brain right now. I was like, oh, everything is Substack, isn't it? No, it's a Medium account. Oh, oops.
Yeah, no, I have commissioned icons of black saints, and I've posted the lives of black saints on my Medium. The main reason for that is that there's no dedicated location for their lives. I actually had to piece together a lot of it from other sources and even non-English sources, rather than overcomplicate it for other people. Just have one place. Here's the life of Saint Fulvianus Matthew. Here's the life of Saint Christoulos, or here's an icon of one of our saints who has never had an icon made of him before. And if anyone else would like to utilize any of this information, it's freely available now. I've made it freely available.
I don't want to discourage anyone from reading your Medium, but could you kind of tease out any of those stories, because they sound fascinating? I read a lot of the ones on your blog that were specifically about liturgical issues, but I haven't delved into the saints specifically yet.
Well, okay, so one of the first icons I commissioned, I believe it was Saint Fulvianus Matthew. He was the Prince and Bishop of Ethiopia. So in his life, he was the Prince of Ethiopia. He was pagan, and then the Apostle Matthew came to evangelize the nation. And what the Apostle Matthew did was he miraculously opened a spring of water that flew out of the ground, and he built a church there. And many people came to the spring and were healed from sicknesses, and they converted to Christianity and were baptized. And Prince Fulvianus was a pagan, and he saw all of this as magic, or he saw his influence as waning. So he sought to persecute the Apostle Matthew, and eventually he captured him and he tortured and killed him. But at first, actually, all of his idols that he set up in order to kill him were destroyed. And then the Apostle Matthew died, and Saint Fulvianus was kind of scared, so he had the Apostle Matthew buried in an iron coffin and thrown into the ocean. And later on, the iron coffin had floated back up to the surface and went ashore, and the Prince Fulvianus saw it, and he realized that the God of the Christians was protecting his body because his relics were incorrupt. They weren't destroyed or damaged or anything. And so Prince Fulvianus went to the next Christian bishop, which was Bishop Platon, and was baptized, and he repented. And in fact, he gave up his kingdom in order to focus his life on God. And he repented for having killed the Apostle Matthew. And when he was baptized, he actually took on the name Matthew. That's why he's called Saint Fulvianus Matthew. And then later on, when Bishop Platon had died, he became the next bishop of Ethiopia, and he took care of his flock, until his last days. And he is canonized as a saint in our church. Thank goodness. Glory to God for that. And, that's kind of an inspiring example of, if you're repentant, then God will accept you at all times. Even if you've committed the worst sins in the world, even if you've killed, the apostles of God, God has that mercy, and he will forgive you, because, that is a characteristic of him. God is merciful.
I forget who said it, but there's a good line I heard once where someone said something along the lines of, when Paul died, it was probably Stephen who met him at the gates of heaven, and Stephen welcomed him gladly. So it's a
Yeah.
wonderful story, and
It's true.
And with I'll just shout out your Medium. I was very fascinated by your story on the installation of pews, which I had never heard that. Like, I had never heard that that was a recent thing. I thought that was extremely fascinating. That you got into how pews can be, spiritually damaging, which is a series of words. I think 90% of my religious friends would probably their jaw would hit the floor if I said them out loud. But it was a fascinating read.
Yeah, that's I guess we're Orthodox. This is sort of stuff that you focus on. We're kind of so old that our problems seem old to modern Christian sects, because no one would ever say that pews are, that pews could be spiritually damaging, except for Orthodox, where for most of our churches we don't have pews at all. We're called to have boldness before God because He has made us worthy, and stand before Him. And in fact, we don't kneel on Sundays, because Sunday is the day of resurrection, and we should not be descending when Christ ascended.
Do most Orthodox churches not have pews, or is it because it sounded like in the article that there were some that do?
Yes, some do, and I think a lot of them in America do have pews, but I can't tell you the exact kind of percentages. I think most of the old world churches don't have pews, but the pews were actually a uniquely American thing within Orthodoxy because it started off in America and then it was kind of imported to the old country.
Wow, interesting stuff. But yeah, I mean that's basically all the questions I had for you specifically. But is there anything else you wanted to touch on really quickly that you think people should know about your tradition?
Well, I think the main thing is if you want to learn more about Orthodoxy, the best place you're going to get that is going to an Orthodox church and going to an Orthodox liturgy. There's a good website called the Assembly of Bishops, and there's a directory on that site for all canonical Orthodox churches in America. Find a church on that site, find one that's close to you, and go to the liturgy on Sunday. And if you have questions for the priest, you can always ask the priest. If you ever have questions for me, you can talk to me on Twitter at Patriarch Primus. I'm also on TikTok at Kaleb of Atlanta. Don't go to my TikTok though. And of course I'm on Medium, which I can be messaged on there, and that is Kaleb of Atlanta Prime. So I will always be willing to talk to anyone who reaches out to me with sincerity, desiring to learn more about Orthodoxy.
How welcoming are Orthodox churches to visitors? I would assume it's probably intimidating going in there for the first time.
Well, I have always been received warmly in Orthodox churches. The first Orthodox church I went to, they basically wanted to throw me into the family the second I showed up there. I was actually kind of shy. I'm a shy person. I'm kind of reserved to myself, and they were almost, pulling me, to sit with them during coffee hour or stand next to them, talk with them about so on and so forth. And that's kind of out of my element. But for them, that's just normal. Like if you're at an Orthodox church, you're, this is family time now. You're not by yourself, because Christianity is a communal religion. It's a religion of the community. They have said that church isn't just a building, but it's also in the hearts of believers, when you leave. And that's true. But it's not just in your own heart, but in all of your hearts together. And in fact, in the Divine Liturgy, a priest cannot celebrate the Divine Liturgy unless there's at least one other person there. There has to be multiple people there in order to celebrate the liturgy. And in fact, the entire liturgy is plural. Let us pray to the Lord that we may send up glory to thee. Let us offer the holy oblation in peace. that we might be bold enough to stand before thee, stuff like that. And that communal sense is not only present in the liturgy, but also present everywhere else. I've been to other churches, I've been to ethnic churches, and of course there's kind of an obstacle there because they use a different language, but even then they still receive you as one of the community very well, as much as I've experienced. So I would say it's a very open and welcoming church.
That I had the exact same experience when I went to my current church for the first time, because it's about, it's 50 people, mostly over the age of 70, and they see the young person walk in, and suddenly they're just like fresh blood, and they all just circle around and start asking questions and giving you hugs, and it's a very, if you're ever in a lowest point in your life and you just want to be surrounded by old people hugs, go to a liturgical church. They like young people. But yeah.
Well, we've definitely got a few young people. But of course, the universal church, there's universal age groups as well. Babies, children, young adults, and then the elderly. So perhaps the reasoning for why you might be embraced or is a little bit different.
Well, mine is unfortunately my religious denomination is dying a slow, painful death. So I think they're a little more desperate than yours is probably. So.
Well, we're desperate for all people to become Orthodox because we want to save them. That's the idea.
Well, there you go. This has been Kaleb of Atlanta, also known as Patriarch Primus on Twitter. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Have a good night. The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.